is a mid-sized community. The church is familiar with small groups, but mid-sized communities are another story. So today we're really excited to explore an old but new vehicle for being present in the world for the sake of God's mission. And so what we found is belonging is easier, missional engagement is higher, and discipleship is laser focused. Communities are happening or community happens and leaders are developed when we lean into this idea of having a culture of healthy mid-sized community. So today we're really excited that we've got Daniel M with us, and he's going to be walking us through 10 strategic insights that will help each of us start, multiply, and sustain a movement of mid-sized communities in our churches. And so we're really excited to begin to talk about this topic today. So before we dig in, hi, welcome. I'm Lori Ruffin. I'm the founder of the COO team and operations manager with the V3 movement. And I'm glad to be with you. We also have today in this conversation, JR Woodward. JR has been planting churches on the East Coast and the West Coast for over 25 years. He's the author of Creating a Missional Culture. He's the co-author of the Church As Movement. He co-founded Missio Alliance and currently serves as the national director of the V3 church planting movement. He's also the co-founder of the Praxis Gathering and writes for numerous websites and journals. And so we're glad to have him here in this very important conversation. And most importantly, Daniel M. He is the director of church multiplication for newchurches.com at Lifeway Christian Resources. He's also a teaching pastor at the Fellowship, which is a multi-site church in Nashville. He's the author of No Silver Bullets, 5 Small Shifts That Will Transform Your Ministry, and the co-author of Planting Missional Churches, Your Guide to Starting Churches That Multiply with Ed Setzer. So we are really excited to have him today. He also co-hosts 2 podcasts, the New Churches Q&A podcast, as well as the 5 Leadership Questions podcast. And I should actually say 3 podcasts, because there's one with his wife called In Between Podcasts. And so I am really glad to have Daniel with us today. He is very well acquainted with this subject of mid-sized communities. And so with that, I think I'm going to share one more thing before I pass the mic to him. We, the V3 movement, have something available for church planters. If you are a church planter or you know other church planters, we have an experience called a learning cohort, and it starts in mid-August, it goes through mid-December, and then continues from mid-January through mid-May. And basically it's 8 months of training on grounded missional practices. Week by week, we meet with church planters across the nation and even some in international spaces, just really talking about how do we build in solid missional practices as we seek to plant in our respective contexts. So if you are a planter or you're thinking about planting, we would encourage you to apply. You can apply through the V3 Movement app, which if you don't have that already downloaded, you should totally download that. You can get it from Amazon, you can get it from iTunes, you can get it from Google Play as well. And as you can see, these are a bunch of people having a great time learning about how we can be effective in mission week after week and building in our respective communities. So we want to encourage you to check that out if you're not already a part of it. And with that, I am going to pass the mic to Daniel. One more thing I just want to say, he's going to be dropping a lot of knowledge in this webinar today. And so if a question comes to mind, if you hear something that sparks an idea or a thought, I want to encourage you to look in your toolbar here. There's a Q&A box. Drop your questions right there. And at the end, we'll have time for Q&A. So we want to encourage everybody to stay to the end so that you can have your specific question answered. And so with that, I give you Daniel.
Well, it's great to be with you all here. With mid-sized communities, I'll give you a little bit of an introduction as to how I stumbled into it. And it was primarily within the context of an established church. Right now, I understand V3 is obviously church planting oriented, and as we work through all of this, I'd love for you to think through, okay, what does this look like within a church planting context? And maybe even that's how we end the time with the questions and answers, because this concept, while I stumbled into it within an established church context, it was as we were using it and as we were developing it, we were actually using it as a way to multiply the church. So it was a multi-site church, and it was a way for us to basically, in the 20 to 50 person sized, mid-sized community, this was essentially launch teams. These were essentially launch teams to start off new campuses, to give people the ability to lead at that level. So that's how it ended up becoming. It was a dream to think about it in that way, and I think there's a lot of application to starting churches using the concepts around it. It may not end up becoming the form, or you may not be using it in the particular form that I explain it here in these 10 insights around mid-sized groups, mid-sized communities, but hopefully there might be a few points here and there that you can take away. So initially, I stumbled into mid-sized communities because the church that I was a part of, the people weren't getting into community life. We were trying to figure out ways to get people plugged into community so that they can be on mission, right? So there's the community aspect of it, but then there's also the side of mission to say, hey, this is an attractional church. People are, they're saying, oh, the pastor is the one that's supposed to do the evangelism. Mission, no, that's just, when we do our Christmas play or it's this or that. And I'm not, I don't see myself in that role, or that is really not even my responsibility. So that was the context of the church. And then we stumbled into Holy Trinity Brompton, Mike Breen, a lot of guys who over in the UK were doing this and had been doing this for quite a while. So we started studying that, and then we started studying, okay, in North America, what does this look like? Who is doing it? So out of all of that, you look at the Mike Breen side, and there's a lot of other people that were trying it, where they basically went to mid-sized communities as church, right? Mid-sized communities as church. And then you also saw the Holy Trinity Brompton side of the spectrum, where it was like a midweek service. It was a 20 to 50 person size space. So as a church, we were like, well, we are over-programmed, we are attractional, we are not missional, and we have groups, and we have on-site groups as well, and classes. And I was like, the last thing that I wanted was another program that was midweek, and we couldn't do the mid-sized groups as church either. So we were trying to find, is there a way within the context of a church that is already going that we could actually establish and start a mid-sized community so that people would learn how to be missionaries everywhere they are, right? So that they can integrate and be followers of Christ. And it would be natural, where it's not just evangelism is bringing someone to church. No, they are living that out. Leslie Newbegin, if you haven't read much of his work, he was very influential in this thinking, and the thinking around this entire concept as well. One of the things he says is the congregation, a healthy congregation, is a hermeneutic of the gospel. Right? In other words, yes, we need to preach the gospel, but how today can people hear the gospel, understand the gospel? Well, it's through healthy churches. Another thing he says is that the church is, the church is to be a sign, instrument, and a foretaste of the kingdom of God. So what does it look like in the context of the North American church? And, that's primarily the context that I'm familiar with. What does it look like within this context to be a sign, instrument, and a foretaste to the kingdom of God, when a lot of people just come to church on Sunday, maybe twice a month, if even, and that's it, right? How is that a sign, instrument, and a foretaste to the kingdom of God, right? So all of that thrown out there, that is why we started mid-sized communities. Now, a few notes, if this is a new concept for you, Edward T. Hall, years ago, decades ago, he introduced the concept because he was studying how animals relate to one another. He then, proceeded to bring it and apply it to humans as well. But he basically, I understood that discovered that there are 4 spaces that animals and thus humans also later on connected in. The first one was the public space, right? So it was kind of think about going to a football game or a hockey game or a large church gathering. You feel belonging, you feel connected, you feel like you're a part of the group, but you're not necessarily going to, if you see the person next to you at the football game, at the grocery store, you're not really going to recognize them, even though you're best friends while you're sitting next to each other, right? So that's that public space. And then you have that social space, which is that 20 to 50 person size space. That's what we're going to be talking about today. It's a space, kind of think of before you sit down at a wedding, at a dinner, there's that reception, that stand-up reception where everyone's kind of mingling, and you can talk to a few people here for the entire time, or you can go and talk to everyone else that you want. It's this kind of in-between middle space. And then you have the personal space, which is 8 to 12 people, typical small groups, where you can share, you can connect, you can go deeper, but you're not necessarily going to go really deep. And then you have the intimate space, which is 1 to 3 people, where it might be you and your spouse, or you or your best friend, you and your accountability group, where you can share your thoughts behind the thoughts. So everything that we're going to be talking about today is around starting and multiplying and sustaining this medium social space of 20 to 50 people. Okay, so the first thing that I'd like to share is it's important that when launching, starting, and multiplying mid-sized communities, you need to start organically, and then you need to build systems as you grow. In most contexts, if you are thinking about what this looks like within an established church context, right? You're already going, you might be a church plant that's been going for 2 years, but you already have things going on, right? The last thing that you want to do is shut down the way community is happening right now. Right? You don't want to shut the small groups down or shut classes down or any, and be like, hey guys, I have come down from the mountain and here is the new way. We are going to be, missional in our church, and we're going to be missionaries. And this is the silver bullet, right? I mean, a lot of times we think about and we present ideas like that. We try to be excited, to try to get the church excited all about it. But if the more you do that, the less people actually want to do it, because you keep on changing. So start organically. In other words, when my wife and I wanted to start this, we just started a pilot group, right? I was envisioning the idea. I was trying to build a coalition of people who would be excited about it, trying to lead change in that way. But then I also just started a pilot group. So I was like, okay, well, we're young. We have little kids. So let's try to find everyone who has little kids. And everyone who has little kids, we're going to invite them into this pilot mid-sized community, and we're going to figure it out as we go. So I didn't have to wait 5 years before we started it. We were learning and experimenting as we go. And I would always encourage you to do that, because there's a lot of models and there are a lot of ways that you can approach this. But the thing that you don't want to do is just take what someone else did and institute it in your context, because it might not work. It may work, but it might not work. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is to plan your gathering schedule 3 to 4 months out at a time. Okay, so the big thing, I'm going to later on talk about the importance of a leadership team and having a leadership team to lead this. But the biggest thing when you think, okay, how do you organize a gathering for 20 to 50 people, right? You're thinking, where do you meet? What do you do? How frequently do you meet? And you're like, well, 20 to 50 people is a lot of people, and how do you organize this all throughout, right? The next point I'm going to be talking about the idea of a leadership team, but what I want to share here is if you can take a Saturday morning as a leadership team, right? One Saturday morning every 3 to 4 months, have breakfast together, connect together, catch up, and then say, okay, for the next 2 hours, we're going to plan out what our schedule is going to be for the next 3 to 4 months. Right? I encourage mid-sized communities to meet every other week, and in the off weeks for smaller groups to form, right? And the one reason I encourage that is because the mid-sized community is a really great place. It's large enough that you're not the center of attention when you're new, but it's also small enough that you're bound to find someone you connect with. Right? Both extroverts and introverts can find community within this 20 to 50 person size space, because the introvert, they're not the center of attention when they're new, and they can find someone to connect with in the 2 hour gathering that you might have every other week, right? They can grab food, eat together with a few people, and they can connect with 2 to 3 people for the entire night. The extrovert can go around and be the butterfly as well. But think about it. If you have this environment, right, this environment of a mid-sized community, and you're meeting every week, when do you have time to go deeper? Right? When do you have time? You might, but a lot of times people's schedules, work, everything is crazy, right? And most people are working more than one job these days, even if the other one is on the side a few hours a week. In light of all that, in terms of a rhythm, I encourage that bi-weekly rhythm of a mid-sized community. And what happens is you now have space to say, hey, these are people that I've connected with. Actually, here are a few people that I really connect with. Let's get together in the off weeks for a breakfast or an evening, or maybe it's the same day that the mid-sized community meets, and let's go deeper and disciple one another. Let's go deeper and study the Bible together, or do a small group together. And what happens is you actually get both dynamics there. Okay, so that's a few notes, and I'm sure some of you are going to have logistical questions at the end, and we can definitely go to that. But the second point was, plan your gathering 3 to 4 months out at a time, so you're not scrambling and it doesn't feel overwhelming every, the 2 to 3 days before you meet together. The next point is meet bi-weekly with your leadership team and have a meal, disciple one another, don't plan together. Okay, so here's the thing. Plan once every 3 to 4 months, but meet bi-weekly with your leadership team. Resist the urge to plan. Because if that's all you do when you get together, you are going to be a glorified party planning committee, and the people who you really want leading your mid-sized community will not want to be there, right? They will not want to be there. When you gather your leadership team together, and I encourage you to have at least 3 to 6 people to lead this together, right? You can have a first among equals if you want. I don't really have an opinion on that, or you guys can be completely equal. That's fine. But have at least 3 to 6 people leading this, because 1 or 2 people cannot lead 20 to 50 people over the long haul in a sustainable manner. It's just too much responsibility, especially because I don't think this should be anyone's full-time job, right? I mean, this is like, work. You want your entire congregation. Do what you do, but here's, instead of leading a group, lead this, or instead of serving in this manner and leading our our ushering ministry, lead a mid-sized community together with 3 to 6 people. Here's the beautiful thing: when you meet bi-weekly and you lead this with 3 to 6 people, and you meet bi-weekly to pray for one another, to eat together, to disciple one another, what ends up happening is that every other week leadership team meeting becomes the example to the rest of the group as to what it looks like to have a healthy discipleship relationship with one another, right? It becomes the model for everyone else. And when it comes to planning, I mean, if you plan 3 to 4 months out at a time, and here's a suggestion, among the 3 to 6 people, split it out. Be like, hey, you're responsible for this week. You're responsible for this week. You're responsible for this week. Doesn't mean you got to do everything. You just need to remember to coordinate it with everyone else. Right? That's all. You don't need to host, cook, all that stuff. You're just the one that has the hat on for that week. And if that's the case, think about it. If you have 6 people and you're meeting every other week, how often do you actually have to do the logistics of, it's not often at all. So that's very sustainable if you want to live together, minister together, and plan together as a result. Okay, so that's the third point. The fourth point is share resources, lessons, and email templates even with other mid-sized community leaders. As you begin one and as you multiply and begin another, learn from one another, share ideas with one another. Even the emails that you send out before you're getting together, share it with one another. Have a way for you to share that with everyone, because a lot of times you're going to be doing similar things, right? So for example, one thing that my group did was, because we were young parents and we were trying to figure out how do you discipline kids, and no one knew how to discipline. I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to teach on how to discipline. And here's, basically this is the framework in which we did. We ate for 45 minutes to an hour, did a 5 to 10 minute big lesson. Not everyone had to sit down, because obviously who has enough seats for 20 to 50 people in a home? Most homes that could work it were about at least 1,500 square feet. You didn't have to have a great room where 20 to 50 people could be there. And plus, if you have a roster where 20 to 50 people are a part of your mid-sized community, you're never going to have all 50 come out on the same week. So if you have a roster of 50, you're probably going to have 20-ish people come out every single time. So, and neither do you need seats for 20 people either. So think about that house, right? House party, 20 people. Some people are going to be sitting in this living room. Others are going to be hanging out around in the kitchen, others in the hallway, you know, and that's the feel for about 45 minutes to an hour where everyone's eating. And they're like, hey guys, let's all come together. For about 5 to 10 minutes, someone gives a lesson. And for the next 30 minutes, you say, hey, with 2 to 4 people who are gathered, who you are sitting around right now, here's some questions. We'd love for you to discuss this idea. That's one of the ways that a mid-sized community gathering could look, right? There's a lot of different ways it could look. That's one of the ways. So one of the things that we did was we were like, okay, we want to talk about discipline. I'm not going to give a talk on discipline. I don't want to show a video on discipline because not everyone can see the TV. So what I basically did was I just found different articles on disciplining kids, printed them out and said, okay, guys and girls, you split up. Here are articles. We want you to actually read it together and act it out. Like we're going to do, and we had kids there. It was really fun. It was like, okay, we're going to act it out and the kids are going to be the judges and they're going to give awards, you know, best actor, you know, kind of like the Oscars. And we basically said, okay, we want you to act out this discipline style. And then we're going to talk about it, right? We integrated principles of adult education into the whole idea. And now we shared that with everyone else. I mean, I guarantee you that was a much more effective environment for discussion and learning and people opening up to one another than just hearing someone talk for 45 minutes, right? So that's an idea, share that. The next point would be to delay. It's better to delay the launch of your mid-sized community than starting it with a thin or small leadership team, right? And I'll give you an example. There's this one girl she was single, fiery, just passionate about the kingdom of God, passionate, so much, early 20s, like so much fire, so much passion. And she wanted to figure out how the church was going to better address issues of sex trafficking in the city. Right. And yes, it was an issue. Yes, she wanted to do it. Yes, she really wanted to go and do it. But I was like, you can't, because you're not going to be able to sustain this yourself. So keep on praying. Let's keep on training you. And your goal is to find a leadership team. Well, she eventually found another couple who she told me were more ready and more excited than they actually were. I didn't know. And they launched. Well, they folded in 6 months because it was too much work for 2 couples to figure out it wasn't 2 couples, it was 3 people because it was her and another couple. And it was too much work for them to sustain, right? So it's better to delay than starting with a thin or a small leadership team. The next point is you want to, when you start a mid-sized community, and you can start it within, basically 3 different ways you can start it. One, have an affinity, right? So mine was a young parents, young families, mid-sized community. The other way you can start it is geographical, right? So if you live in this side of the city or this portion of the city or in this borough or whatever, this is a mid-sized community for this area. Or you can have a societal need, like let's say sex trafficking, right? Or homeless ministry, or there's some sort of societal need that you're wanting to meet. So you can create mid-sized communities on each and every one of those areas. But here's the point. However you create it, whatever your gathering focus is, that needs to become your mission focus, right? It needs to be. So in other words, as a group for young families, our mission focus was to reach other young families. Geographically, if you lived in this borough of the city, and that's why the mid-sized community started, the goal was to reach that side of the mid-sized community, and then societal need as well. So that, however you're gathering, that becomes your missional focus. And how that relates to multiplication, think about it like this. It was like, okay, now our mid-sized community multiplied a couple times. One way we multiplied was we sent out leaders. We sent out leaders that we were training in our mid-sized community, and they had a different focus. right? And those who aligned with their focus that went with them, and others who didn't stayed with us. And here's the thing, when you split a small group, and I don't believe you should split groups, when you split a small group, no one likes it, right? And here's the thing that boggles my mind about multiplying small groups. The main purpose of small groups is what? Connection, it's transparency, it's depth. You want people to be vulnerable. You want people to open up. You want people to connect, right? I mean, that is the point. That is the magic around small groups, right? Especially in culture these days where it's hard enough to just open up, right? And it's this idea of, yeah, I have community. Look at how many comments I get on Instagram, or look how many Facebook friends I have, right? It's like, well, yeah, but when's the last time you actually connected with each other in person, right? So, I mean, that's the day and age we live in. So here's the thing about small groups. If you start small groups and you tell all your small groups and you tell your whole church, hey, the point of this small group is you need to multiply the small group. Doesn't that go against connection? And every time you bring a new person in, doesn't it break the connection in the small group? So here's the thing about small groups. I think there should be active open times and closed times. But the point of the small group is not multiplication. The point of the small group is connection. Okay, so where does multiplication happen within a church? It's mid-sized communities, right? And it's mid-sized communities because think about it. In a 20 to 50 person size space, if 10 people leave to go start another mid-sized community, it's not going to massively affect the group because you're not going to be connected to all 50 people, right? And if you are really connected to these 10 people, you are probably going to be a part of the group that leaves and starts a new one. So you see how that connects into multiplication. And also, we were a young family, so the next group, we ended up leaving and coming down to the States, but the group that we were cultivating, the leaders who are part of our group that we were about to send out, they were passionate about the Y, right? The YMCA in our neighborhood. So the next group that we were going to multiply were young families at that Y, right? And then that was the way the multiplication was going to continue on, right? So that's that point. The next point is don't create rules to obtain behavior. Instead, be a cultural architect that shapes your ethos to create that culture. Okay, so here's the thing. If you said as a mid-sized community and you told every brand new person coming in, hey, we are so glad you are with us. We are so glad you have come to be a part of this mid-sized community. The goal of this mid-sized community, actually, it's required, it's mandatory that everyone joins a small group in the off weeks, right? So you're going to come and be here every other week, and then you're going to be in a small group in the off weeks. And in that small group, you're going to open up about your life. And in the mid-sized community, you are going to invite your non-Christian neighbors. And this is, I mean, this is going to be what happens. Okay, are you ready to join the mid-sized community? People are going to be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, you know, let's date before you give me the ring, right? I mean, this is like, what are you trying to do here? And you're not going to be able to grow your mid-sized community. So don't create rules to obtain the behavior. Instead, be a cultural architect. Instead, okay, so welcome people that come. And what happens is when you have these gatherings where you're eating and the lesson, the 5 to 10 minute lesson is a lesson that doesn't presume that anyone is a Christian. You're not shying away from prayer. I mean, that's fine. You're not shying away from talking about Jesus, but you're just not assuming, hey, everyone remember the woman at the well? Yeah, man, that woman was such a heathen. We should not be like that. Man, tell me about, and you start, doing kind of jokes, or, you start playing around with Christianese and talking Christianese. I mean, who do you think will, everyone who is a part of it, they're going to be like, well, I can't invite my non-Christian neighbors here. I can invite, I mean, they're not going to understand any of this. Yeah, it's funny to me, but they're not going to understand any of that. So instead of doing that, create the environment in which everyone's going to be like, actually, my friend would really feel welcome here. They would actually really want to be here, right? And then you begin creating that behavior, and you begin saying, hey, guys, whether you realize it or not, there are a lot of people who are meeting in the off weeks, one-on-one, in groups, and they're meeting, because we only meet twice a month, but in the off weeks, there are a ton of people here who are meeting to go deeper in study and to pray with one another and to encourage one another and to study the Bible and what Jesus means, what relevance Jesus has for us today. If you're interested in that, just let me know. I'd love to introduce you, or you probably already met people who are doing that. right? You see what happens when you create that culture. Instead of telling people what to do, and what adult likes that anymore anyway, you're creating that environment where it's normal, right? It's normal, right? And that's what leads us into the next point, which is the whole idea around inclusivity, smaller groups meeting in the off weeks, right? These small groups meeting in the off weeks are key for depth and growth. They're super key, and yes, they need to be normal, but especially those individuals in your mid-sized community who are Christian and who are looking and longing for deeper connection. These small groups that meet in the off weeks are going to be incredibly important for them and for spiritual growth, because you can't really go deep in a mid-sized community context, right? Within a 20 to 50 person size space, the point is connection. The point is introducing people to one another. The point is, finding people that you connect with that you can then go deeper with. The point is, in a small group, how many people are going to be excited about mission? In 12 people, maybe 1 or 2. Within a group of 20 to 50 people, you might have 5 to 10. Right? And if you have 5 to 10 people, there can be momentum that gathers. One of the mid-sized communities, they were in a farming community just outside the city. So they actually grew a community garden together, harvested the vegetables, gave it to the local community center. No one in the city was going to do that, right? But they wanted to do it because it was contextual and missional where they were at. Okay. Last 2 points. The ninth one is, don't let attendance become your success factor. Right? Attendance, because you're going to go up and down, basically because 20 to 50 people, you're not the center of attention when you're new. And you're also, because you're not the center of attention when you're new, if you don't come, you might not be missed, right? You might not be missed. People might not even notice that you're not there, right? So the whole idea around the mid-sized community is take attendance subtly, but don't do a roll call. But here's the whole thing with the mid-sized community. You're creating this environment for people to connect with one another. So what does success look like? Success is not have they come every single time. Success is not whether I think they belong, it's whether they think they belong. The unique thing about the mid-sized community is someone may miss 2 months, but they still might feel like that is their community. Versus in a small group, you miss 2 months, it's going to feel weird for you to come back, right? It's fascinating to see how people's perception change, how it changes when it comes to all of that. And here's the last point. The health of your leadership team determines the health and longevity of the mid-sized community. Right? I've seen mid-sized communities fumble and we went from about 0 to 700 people in mid-sized communities in 2 years. And I've seen a lot of them struggle and eventually shut down because the mid-sized community leadership team became a party planning committee. And in the moment they became a party planning committee, your most dedicated leaders, it's like, I don't want to be a party planning committee, right? It's like, and even when it comes to service planning at the church, right? It's like, I don't want to worry. If people are not encountering God when we worship with one another, I don't want to do this, right? I'm not here just to do 3 songs, a tight 30-minute message, do a little song and bless people. And, I want life change to happen. And if your leadership team is not spending time with one another, praying, investing, shepherding, being on mission and seeing that with one another and seeing that their responsibility is to, create this environment where people are becoming disciples and meeting Christ and discovering one another. If that is not happening, your mid-sized community will fizzle, right? This is not a party. These are mid-sized communities for mission and on mission. So those are 10 points, but I'll throw it back to JR and we'll keep on going.
Hey, thanks, Daniel. That's super, super helpful, very practical. I think it's going to be something that's a lot of people are going to benefit from. So I want to start off just with a couple of thoughts and then some questions, and then we'll open it up to anybody else who has some questions. So be sure to, if you have some questions, there's a Q&A folder, you can kind of write them in, and Lori will we will get to those right after this next segment here. I think what's cool, like with Hall's work and Joseph Meyer's popularization of it, with these 4 spaces, that kind of architecture that Jesus himself lived into it, before the sociologists discovered it. He confided in the 3, he trained the 12, mobilized the 70, and spoke riddles to the crowds, if you will, parables.
Yeah.
And I think within that, I think you bring a good point that how small groups is very difficult to multiply. I think in some ways, if you look at how Jesus looked at small groups, it's very different than how we live in them today. It was actually a bounded set of people, like that was by invite only, and they could go deeper in that, but that wasn't an isolated space. They had the 70 that they were with. And I know in V3, a lot of our training is like that personal space is for discipleship. And part of the whole discipleship is knowing how to build a mid-sized group well and multiply it. And when you tie discipleship to actually, like you mentioned, what's the best thing to multiply? Yeah, it's like mid-sized groups. Sometimes you want to get rid of at least 10 people so that you have space for others wanting to come in, if it's a happening place. And I think your places seem like really fun mid-sized group. I think the other cool thing about the mid-sized group, as opposed to public space, which can be very inspirational, right? I mean, the best public spaces inspire, I think, the grassroots work and movement, which happens in multiplying mid-sized groups. But is what you can do in a mid-sized group that you can't do in the other spaces.
Yeah.
And I just loved your example of what you did with the kids and how the kids were involved. One of the big questions that I often get is how do you approach kids in a mid-sized group? Since that was kind of your whole target, what are some different ways that you did that? So you're probably not doing, the kids are probably not to judge it every week. That's kind of a one-off type of thing, but like how in a rhythmic way do you have so many kids involved, and what are the different ways that you can approach kids in the church?
Yeah. So what's interesting about with kids, especially, and you look at even the research that talks about what kids need to become, to keep the faith in a sense, and to continue to be Christians once they go off to college, and there's all that, right? And one of the things, obviously, Bible reading is huge as a family rhythm, but it's this idea of, hey, do you know another adult? Do you know several adults other than your parents who love the Lord and who are living out their faith? So the neat thing about mid-sized communities is that you might even have single parents, right? Single parents or singles who want to be a part of this environment, and they want to be parents, or they love children, right? But they don't have children themselves. So the beauty of environments like this is that it's intergenerational, and that you could have these individuals who are like, hey, as a single, look at how I can relate with and invest in and be a part of the body of Christ. And look at my family. I have family here, even though I may not have biological kids of my own, or I may not have a spouse. I have kids, but I may not have a spouse, and I need that help. So it was beautiful to see the church coming together in that way, and one another's, Acts 2, right? The end of Acts 2, one another's needs being met. Practically speaking, when teenager-wise, the mid-sized communities that had teenagers, the teenagers were a part of the discussion. They were a part of the eating. They were part of the discussion. Sometimes they had maybe even a teenage-focused group. But I think the beauty of it is that there is that intermingling, that connection with one another. Now, obviously, the teenagers are probably going to eat together, right? There's going to be that natural connection that happens, but it's also within the context of the broader. You're not farming student ministry out to the church. You're doing it with one another, right? In terms of younger kids, sometimes you just got to keep them entertained, and you got to put a DVD on, and especially when they're super young and it's hard to teach them anything. But the older they get, the more you can actually involve them in. And honestly, for the parents with infants and really young toddlers, the mid-sized community was a break for them because the kids were able to connect with one another and run around, and they were able to actually have adult conversation.
So with the toddlers and the infants, was there somebody who was kind of dedicated to taking care of them during that time, or was it just kind of, during part of the time if you had a discussion, or how that happened?
So during the eating time, it was organic.
Yep.
Because people, and what's neat is people started taking care of one another's kids. And one another's kids started going to one another's parents because they saw them on. So it was beautiful to see that. During teaching times, we would usually have something or someone in charge, where sometimes it would be planned, sometimes it would be integrated, sometimes it would just be, we're not doing any lesson or craft or anything. You guys are just going to go hang out, watch DVD, and run around, because one house had a basement and they were cloistered off. Right. So we were, but we tried to have some sort of prep for them, especially for the younger ones.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the other element you bring in is like how mid-sized groups is probably the most comfortable space for a non-Christian to come, as opposed to a small group or intimate space. And public space could be good, but it also may be too foreign, and
it depends.
I mean, it depends. I'm not saying it could be.
Yeah.
But like, so if that's the case, and mid-sized groups are a good place to have, actually, be more in people's space, a place that they might be more comfortable with. How did you because you were kind of starting with the existing church with Christians. So how did you help the Christians cultivate that environment where the non-Christians, you kind of mentioned, language and so forth, but what are the ways that you help train them so that someone would feel comfortable bringing a person who wasn't identified as themselves as a Christian?
Yeah. So I did a mandatory invite only 4-week training plus a all day retreat. So it was probably about 8 hours of altogether 8 hours of teaching that I did for them, learning how, and the first session was a missional ecclesiology, right? So I was bringing in Christopher Wright. I was talking about the mission of God. I was bringing in Leslie Newbegin. I mean, it was probably the most missiological thing most of the church ever heard. But I was like, hey guys, this is not our mission. This is God's mission that he is calling us into. And I really hammered that in and helped, that was the preface around all of it. Later on, I then went to culture and how to create culture and how to be cultural architects. And as on our day retreat, I was like, okay, ethical dilemmas, like how do you lead ethically around, all of these social issues that might come up as well. And how do you coach well? So I was doing a lot of leadership development. Most of it was leadership development, but that first week was really a missional ecclesiology. And myself, other leaders, anyone who not only led, but was a part of a leadership team had to do it, had to go, not, either concurrently or they're like kind of, it's like, I want them to be one of the leaders. They're thinking about it. Well, they had to do that first before they could even step up and lead, because we wanted to really cultivate that culture and cultivate that. So it didn't become just like a party,
Yeah. Well, because I remember one of our churches that we've been working with in North Hollywood, they would be really good at these kind of gatherings and have a lot of non-Christians. And it was interesting even how, they were started, it was their place to belong. There was someone from another church that came into that environment who, think of it as a Christian organization. I mean, this was kind of just a non-element, but they came in and they literally got up in the group. I thought this was a Christian gathering. They were hearing people cuss or all these things. And like, they literally kind of stormed out of the room, because they were upset. They totally missed the point. So I think it's great that you have that, a deep level of training.
Yeah.
One of the things that you kind of mentioned too, which I think is a beautiful thing about mid-sized groups, is that they're really kind of designed for anybody to lead. In fact, it's ideal that you're not necessarily the full-time paid by the church person who are leading these mid-sized groups. And so you want to do it with enough people. How do you feel like that the mid-sized group ministry, what type of meaning did that give to the people? How did it actually change their lives? Because you were in a church that had small groups that weren't you weren't able to get more people involved, and you had the big public gathering. So how did that actually, introducing mid-sized groups, change those individuals themselves who helped lead them?
Yeah. So the church was, and here's the thing that I really wanted to say. Under 150 to 200 people, if your church is under 200 people, right? Under 150 people. You don't really need a formal mid-sized community. Not saying that you shouldn't have them, but the need for formal mid-sized communities within a church of under 200 is not as important as over 200, because over 150 to 200, not everyone knows each other anymore, right? So our church was over 200.
Sure.
People didn't know each other, so it was like, how do I find people to connect with, right? How do I find community? And this was the way to create the natural environment that would be present in a church of under 200 to connect with one another.
Yeah.
Right. So number one was connection, and then we help them grow as a result.
All right, and we got to move into the next section, but I do want to kind of get your thoughts on starting, if you're starting a church, and mid-sized groups is what you want to multiply.
Yes.
What would your advice in that? Because obviously, that's what we do. But
yeah.
I'll let Lori go. There's a lot of things we could have interaction for a while, but Lori, go ahead and help us know what we're rolling into.
Yeah, thank you so much, Daniel. I think you gave a lot of great advice. We do have some questions. Some of them are process-oriented or logistics-oriented. And so could you speak to that? I know there was a question that came up around, and you kind of started to hit on it. Basically, what does this look like for smaller churches? And so you mentioned that a formal process is not as necessary. So what modifications would you make when applying, like, for informal sort of application in a smaller context?
So for a church that is being planted, no formal gatherings yet, the mid-sized community idea is perfect. That is your launch team, right? So do you have the core, that is the core leadership, your leadership team, and you have 20 to 50 people who are a part of your launch team that you're going to be shepherding and pastoring. I mean, and that's so different than launching with 12 people, and your core is 12 and you don't have a larger launch team, because then everyone expects that you're going to be their pastor. Even if they recognize and admit that that's not going to be the case as the church grows larger, that's often how they feel, right? And it's going to feel very different once you are not their go-to person all the time. Right. So that's, I think, in planting a church, the idea of a mid-sized community, even having a couple mid-sized communities before you launch is powerful. Once you launch, right, what is the role, what is the need of a mid-sized community when the whole church feels like a mid-sized community, right? So that's where I think it begins to shift and change, right, during those first couple of years if you launch and you're still under 100.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of interesting how many, just to add in here, how many churches are actually mid-sized groups.
Yeah.
But they treat it like a public space.
Yes.
And I speak to that a little bit, because I think it's like the beauty of what you can do in a mid-sized group as opposed to a public space, again, because of the actual number of people. I mean, even like some people do, a public space with 30 people, it feels so awkward.
Yeah.
when you just do the monologue and singing or whatever. So speak to that a little bit, just from even a sociological but experiential level.
Yeah, well, that's brilliant. I mean, why do people go to concerts? Right? Why do people go? Like, I'm going to the Opry. I don't like country music. I live in Nashville. I don't like country music. I have never listened to, I think people say it's a radio show, but we're going to go to the Opry, the Grand Ole Opry this Saturday, because it's, it's an experience. It's a concert. And I found every time I go to a concert, whether I like the genre of music or not, I do not like country music. I usually have a great time because it's inspirational. It's large. There's an energy and experience to that. So that's why when you think of a lot of churches that are actually 50 people or 75 people, the reason, it feels kind of, I need to watch my language here, right? But it feels kind of dead. It doesn't feel exciting, is because you don't have there's not enough people. There's not that critical mass, where you need that critical mass for talent. You need that critical mass for that energy, for that to happen. So as a result, it's just, it feels like a second-rate kind of a church service. Whereas in reality, if you harness the mid-sized community environment and the strengths of it, it actually, there's so much more meaning, and the experience will be so much better.
And one of the things we did in LA, you know, is we waited. If someone wanted to start a public gathering, we say you have to multiply 5 mid-sized groups, and then you can start a weekly gathering. Then the weekly gathering starts off with some energy, and again, it's like how all four spaces can work toward mission well, but each one has its strengths and weaknesses, and we need to live into that.
Could you, Daniel, speak to who's on the leadership team for the midsize, community? What qualifications do they need to have, and competencies that they need to be trained on in order for them to function well?
Yeah, completely. Now, if anyone's interested in kind of the unique way that I trained, I do have a free workbook on my site that we could probably link to, and all of that is in there. But in terms of the qualifications for the team, honestly, it kind of came down to, we did the APEST assessment, and we talked through what your base and phase is for the APEST, and we also integrated strengths.
You may want to mention APEST for people that may or may not be aware of it.
Okay, are you Ephesians 4, apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, or teacher? So what calling do you lean more toward? So we broke down Ephesians 4, and we talked about, APEST and what that all looks like. But we did also talk about the idea of a leader. What does it look like to be a leader? What kind of qualifications and competencies do you need in order to do that? And for that, we were like, okay, what does a good leader look like? Well, you need to know what you're good at, what you're not, which is the whole idea of StrengthsFinder and the whole idea around the APEST. But then after that, it was like, okay, do you have the ability to lead a larger group of people, right? And how do you know if someone can lead a larger group of people? Can they work through a team, right? It's not just about leading others, and it's not even about working with others or even working through others. It's, can you lead leaders, right? And there's a big, intuitively, most people can lead a group of 12 people because you don't really need much team leadership skills to do that. But in order to lead a mid-sized community, you need to know how to work through leaders and work with leaders and lead leaders, because you can't do it all yourself. So, character, you can use whatever framework, character, competency, chemistry, there's all that. You want to be friends. You're discipling these people, so you want to connect with one another. So all that holds true, and you need to have, but honestly, you're going to be discipling one another, right? So there's that whole aspect of ongoing learning, ongoing growth that comes into play.
Yes, and when you did that initial training, where you did the 4 weeks and then the all-day retreat, was that specifically for the leaders, or even for the people who would be attending, the Christians that were part of the church that would be attending the mid-sized communities?
It was specifically for the leaders, okay. And whoever the leadership team would be. It cost us probably $50 to $100 per person, because we would do food. It was probably more toward 100, because we would buy all the books for them. StrengthsFinder book, the assessment, Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership with Ruth Haley Barton. Several books that they would have to read while we were doing it. So there was a financial cost that we said, this is how much it costs, but we found money to pay it for you. And this is invite only. So we didn't even open up the registration to anyone. You had to be invited.
Yes. So actually, since we're talking about finances, that was one of the questions. What about the financial framework for the mid-sized community meetings? Who handles the bill for food?
Yeah, so we tried to make it, I hate potlucks. I hate organizing potlucks. I love potlucks. I just hate organizing it. It's like, you bring dishes, you bring food, you bring dessert. And I was like, it's so much work. And that's why, if you look up meal trains, there's like it's a great way to organize food for other people, easy. So what we did basically was we were like, okay, let's just we did so many variations of this, but we basically said, okay, if your last name ends with A to I, you need to bring a main dish with meat in it. And if your last name goes from like J to Z, then you basically split your group in half, then bring a main dish with a veggie or, you know, salad, you know, that kind of more toward that end. So, oh, sorry, my Siri was recording all of that. Okay, so basically we split it up that way because when we split it up was like main dish and bring salad or dessert. Some weeks we would have so much salad and dessert and nothing really to eat.
Yes.
Right. And we were like, it was so chaotic to organize because I'm not asking people to RSVP. I'm not asking people to confirm or anything. We're just like, it's happening. Here's the address. Here's the time. Here's the date. If this is your last name, bring this. That's it. Right. And what we did was the host homes, and we usually had about 3 to 5 different host homes per mid-sized community. Never just do it at your house. Never just have one. Because think about hosting a party for 50 people every other week. Like that is so stressful and tiresome.
Overwhelming.
Yeah. But if you have 3 to 5 people who want to do it, I mean, what, like you're doing it once or twice or 3 times a year. And most people can handle that, especially if they have the gift of hospitality and they want to do that. Right. So we basically split it up like that. And we said, whoever's hosting, you handle the drinks and dessert if you want, and the plates. So, you know, it was a little bit more costly for the people with who are hosting, but they tended to be okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do want to mention, Lori, before we get to the next question, like if you haven't got Daniel's book, No Silver Bullets, he really kind of talks about mid-sized group and within chapter 4 and gives a lot of the good practical things. So if you haven't checked that out, and it also kind of helps you look at the 4 spaces. And again, like sometimes we hear a new idea and we don't know how to implement change well. And we think we have to stop all this, and some good warnings there, because you can see a nice idea, but like so check that out. No Silver Bullets.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for shouting that out, JR. I think that there are definitely more questions that people have than we have time to process them. So right now we're going to make a break, but check out that book. Also stay tuned in for the replay. There may be others that after having listened to this conversation that you think would be helpful to take this information in. Also, Daniel mentioned a free workbook that talks about training. And so there's some resources on like how to train the mid-sized community leaders. And so definitely want to call that out as well. So just want to thank everybody for attending today. Thank you, Daniel, for breaking down these 10 really important tips to how to build a mid-sized community. Thank you, JR. And we just want to tell everybody that this is sponsored by the V3 movement. We're really glad to be with you and to continue to resource the leaders for mission.